Donald Trump shattered norms long before becoming president. For years, the developer and reality TV star gained political attention by falsely suggesting that America's first black president was illegitimate.
Why doesn't he show the birth certificate? And why is he spending millions of dollars in legal fees to get away from this issue?
From the day he announced his White House run, it seemed clear that unity wasn't a priority.
How stupid are our leaders? How stupid are these politicians?
That speech set the tone for much of his presidency. Groups tarred as the other or the enemy would face a level of vitriol not seen in decades. Mexican immigrants were villainized as drug dealers and rapists. Muslims abroad were deemed so dangerous that they couldn't even enter the country. His 2016 opponent, Hillary Clinton, was cast as a criminal. Protesters at his rallies treated harshly.
You see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees.
His most frequent target, though, has been the media.
A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people.
While raging at his enemies, Donald Trump also delivered his America First message of economic populism, and it spoke to a large swath of white and working-class America who lifted him all the way to the White House.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
But less than a year into the job, a tragedy presented the president with a moment for healing. A neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, Virginia turned deadly when a white supremacist plowed his car into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing a young woman. In the moment, the president couldn't find the words to clearly condemn the hatred.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Since Charlottesville, even though right-wing extremists have been responsible for the vast majority of terrorist attacks and plots in the United States, the president almost exclusively condemns and inflates left-wing violence.
The violence and vandalism is being led by Antifa and other radical left-wing groups.
But a confluence of crises over the last year has perhaps tested the nation and its commander-in-chief more than any other in modern history. As the novel coronavirus spread rapidly across the United States and has now killed nearly 400,000 Americans, President Trump has consistently underplayed the threat.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine.
He's sidelined key experts and berated state officials who've tried their own lockdowns to stop the virus's spread. In Michigan, for example, Mr. Trump supported armed anti-lockdown demonstrators who occupied the state capitol in April. 6 men were later charged with conspiring to kidnap Michigan's Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer. The president spoke at a rally in Lansing shortly after that plot was thwarted.
Hey, Governor, let your state open. Get your kids back to school, Governor. Not a good governor.
Amid the pandemic, another crisis. Nationwide protests broke out over the police killings of George Floyd in Minneapolis and Breonna Taylor in Louisville.
Hands up!
Protesters across the country took to the streets, decrying the disproportionate police violence experienced by Black Americans. While most demonstrations were peaceful, some did lead to violent clashes with law enforcement. Instead of an appeal for calm, the president inflamed tensions.
You just saw it outside. You saw these thugs that came along. These people call them protesters. Isn't it beautiful?
In a remarkable scene over the summer, military forces were called in to help clear protesters outside the White House so the president could pose outside a nearby church.
Stay by.
And long before any votes were cast in last year's election, the president repeatedly, falsely claimed, just as he had in 2016, that the vote count would be rigged against him.
This election will be the most rigged election in history.
And he refused to denounce supporters who threatened violence, famously refusing to rebuke the hate group known as the Proud Boys.
What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
Who would
right
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
And when it was clear that he did, in fact, lose, a moment when virtually every other losing presidential candidate has graciously conceded the race and wished the victor good luck, President Trump did the opposite.
I've already decisively won.
He continued to falsely claim that he'd been robbed of victory by fraud. When his dozens and dozens of legal appeals were thrown out of courts nationwide, the president went to enormous lengths to personally pressure state officials to overturn Biden's victory.
So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes.
At rallies, he continued to claim that Democrats had stolen the election and that an illegitimate president was trying to take the White House from him and from them. He asked his supporters to come to Washington last week.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
That afternoon, an angry mob of Trump supporters and various extremist, white supremacist, and anti-government groups battered the police, broke into the Capitol, left 5 people dead, and cast a dark shadow over the end of the Trump presidency. Now, after ominous warnings from law enforcement, the nation's capital and state capitals all over the country are on edge. They're worried about who may show up next, armed and dangerous and full of false, poisoned ideas about a stolen country. For the PBS NewsHour,